So in a typical year, when you get ready to issue your device registration invoices, you're gonna issue them in batches of, I don't know, however many thousand you have to issue. So if we go up to revenue, the next thing on their ledger is batch invoices. Excuse me for a second. Now, to make this make sense, I'm going to log out of this little test county because I've got very, very limited data in there. And I'll go to my main test county where I still have limited data, but I have more. Okay, so on the batch screen, actually I have a disadvantage here because I can't show you the split batching, but that's okay. On this batch screen, the first thing I'm going to see is what billing cycle am I dealing with? Now remember, in your production system, you're going to have 4 buttons here because you're going to have current and next calendar year, and then you're also going to have current and next fiscal year. So when you're generating a batch of invoices, the first thing you'll be doing is picking whether you're on the calendar cycle or the fiscal cycle, which will define whether you're sending out your device invoices or your price verification invoices. And we always have current and next available. Obviously, once we pass January 1st, 2025, current will become 2025 and next will become 2026. I can't see any reason for going back more than a year for generating batch invoices, so hopefully that's sufficient. The second thing we got to pick is the version, the fee version we're going to use. And this is always going to default to the newest version that is applicable for the date we're running the invoices for. Now, when we're generating batches, there's many different kinds of batches we can create. The first one that we're going to deal with is batch invoices, device registration invoices. Once we've generated those and we start receiving payments, you don't, let's say you want to generate certificates for everyone who pays. You don't have to go in every time you register a payment and go create and download a certificate. You can do that in batch mode as well. So if I've got a bunch of invoices that have been sent out and some of them have been paid, I will check invoice certificates here, and then you can choose whether you're going to generate them for paid locations only or everyone that received an invoice. Okay, so you can also generate your certificates in batch for mailing out. Once you get past the due date on that first invoice, you can generate all of your second invoices, your late notices, automatically. And that's going to take everyone who received a first invoice, who has not paid it, and the invoice due date has passed. And it will generate a late invoice for everyone in that category. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one here. That should be here, second invoices. Okay, another thing you can generate, remember I said there are some counties that send out the certificates with the invoices? But there's 2 ways to accomplish that. Riverside County, for example, has the certificate is simply the bottom part of the invoice, the detach and keep part of the invoice. But if you don't do that, if you have separate Word templates with a certificate in one of them and an invoice in the other, you can choose to generate certificates with invoices. So it'll generate the invoice and then the certificate, and then it'll glue them together into a PDF file. And then lastly are incremental invoices. And I'm going to save those and we'll talk about those later. But as you can imagine, you send out your device registration invoices in January, and then sometime in June or July, you got a whole bunch of businesses that have more devices now. And maybe you want to send out invoices for the registration of those additional devices. That's what incremental invoices are all about. So we're going to generate our 2024, let's go to 2025. We'll generate our 2025 device registration invoices. I need to specify an invoice date. And when you're doing batch mode, the date you want listed on the invoice is frequently not the date you're running the batch on. Because I might run this batch and then print them out on Monday to send out. So I really don't want the date on here to reflect today. I want it to reflect whatever the actual invoice date is. So I can put in 7/1/2024 for the invoice date. Now remember, when we looked at our configuration and our county preferences, we had this first invoice due date option. That gets really important when we're talking about batch invoicing. When you're generating an invoice one at a time, it's easy to manually modify that due date. When I generate 500 of these in a batch, they're all going to get the same invoice date and the same due date. So it's really important to know if I set 7/21/24 as the invoice date, what's the due date going to be? And in this case, it's going to be 60 days from that date. Or if I pick something like this, I can make them all due August 1st. Okay. Then we talk about the exclusions. So you remember I talked about how in the normal course of the year, you're going to invoice all of the locations that are on the regular annual inspection schedule. But some of your locations and some of your device types, you want to exclude from this process. Okay, so farmers markets, you're not going to send them an invoice at the beginning of the year. You're going to invoice them when you actually seal their devices. Same thing for things like electric, vapor, and water submeters, where you require those to be brought into the office, and you don't know necessarily how many of them you're going to inspect in a given year, et cetera, et cetera. Or you may have, there's all kinds of different reasons why you might want to exclude certain locations or certain device types from this invoicing process. So these are multi-select lists where I can pick one or more entries in here to exclude from this process. And as I pick things to exclude, you'll see my counts at the bottom go down as I start excluding locations that have those device types. One more word on this, and obviously when we go through the process of actually generating your invoices, I hopefully will be sitting with you and we can go over this again. But with location types, if I pick farmers market, it's going to simply skip any location that is classified as a farmers market when it generates this batch. If I pick a device type, let's say I pick hanging scales - farmers market, it's not just going to skip that device type. It's going to skip every location that has that device type. And that's really important if you have locations that have a mix of those kinds of excluded device types and other device types, because what this exclusion is doing is, you see what it says excludes locations with these device types. So just be careful with that. If you exclude a certain device type, it will exclude every location that has that device type, even if the location has other device types that you would normally invoice for. All right, we're getting down to the bottom part, which is the good part. But before we get down to generating the invoices, we can also choose the sort order. Now, when you generate these invoices to print, unfortunately right now, CalCATS, if you have 20 Safeway stores, we don't have the ability to generate a single invoice that lists all 20 stores on it. So you're going to get 20 separate one-page invoices for those stores. To make it easier to group those together so you can make stuffing envelopes easier, we let you sort on the number of locations. What that means is your businesses that have the most locations are going to come out first. So if Starbucks has 50 locations, they'll come out first, and all 50 of their invoices will print first. And then McDonald's will come out with their 40 locations, and they'll all print out together, and so forth. So it makes it easier to group all those pages together and stuff them in an envelope to send. On the other hand, if you're, generating invoices in some other manner, you can also sort by business and location name, or account number. So that controls the order of the invoices in the generated PDF file. Okay, so lots of options there. That's all setting up the batch. As I change these options, you'll see the total count down here will change. But ultimately, we get down to, there are 8 locations in this test county that are eligible to receive an invoice for 2025. 0 of them have already received an invoice. because I may go do some manual invoices first, and I don't want to re-invoice them when I generate this batch. So I've got 8 locations remaining to generate invoices for, and then I can choose how many I want to generate. Now, in the real world, you're going to have a couple of thousand here. And in my experience, a 2,000-page PDF is unwieldy. It's hard to open on your computer. It's hard to copy, from one location to another. And sometimes the printer will barf on it because it's too big. So I recommend generating PDFs in batches of about 500. So if I had 2,000 invoices to generate, I would do it in 4 separate batches. And each time I run a batch, it then excludes that 500 from the next batch.
Can I ask a question about the exclude locations with these device types?
Yep.
So remember, or like on when we're configuring the actual device, this was like a while ago that you showed us. You know how we could do like for farmers market, change it to the billing cycle till none?
Yep.
Do we still replicate, or do we still have to do that in that page
Nope.
you're just in as well?
Nope. In the calculations, any device type that has a billing cycle of none is totally ignored for the purposes of device registration invoicing. And when I say totally ignored, when I'm determining if a location is eligible to receive an invoice, I'm only looking at device types that have a billing cycle.
Okay.
So if the only device type this location has is electric submeters other, then they're skipped entirely.
Okay.
In addition, when I'm compiling the data for a specific individual invoice, I'm only including device types at that location that have a matching billing cycle to the one I'm running the batch for.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
So on that other screen, we wouldn't necessarily need to put in farmers market scale if we already selected none.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm ready to go here now. The first few times you do this, I'm going to very strongly recommend you hit the trial run button before you hit generate. Generate is actually going to enter the transactions into the transaction logs, generate all the printable PDFs, and save all of that information into the database. But the first few times you run this, you're going to want to look at what the invoices look like before you actually generate them. So when I hit trial run, it's going to run all the calculations as if it were going to save them in the database, but instead of saving them, it just spits them out to an Excel file. Okay, and the Excel file has 2 tabs. It has a summary tab, which gives me for each location that will be invoiced. It gives me the details, the invoice amounts, the PV amounts, all the stuff that's at a top level invoice. Now within that, right, this Safeway 1, 2, 3, 4. If I go to the details tab, it's going to show me each device type that's on that invoice. So they're being invoiced for hanging scales, retail motor fuel, package audits, computing sales, price verification, and vapor submeters. And for each of those, it gives me all of those columns that we have on the invoice screen that let me verify the calculation, the capping groups, the device fees, the location fees, the admin fees, the capped amounts, and so forth. Okay, so the trial run is a really great way to look at everything that's going to come out in an invoice batch. Check all the numbers, check all the calculations before you actually hit the generate button, which then executes all of that and saves it in the database. And in fact, when I run the trial run, I usually generate 100% of everything. Even if you got 2,000 locations, you can generate them in the trial run. It's still pretty quick. It'll take 30 or 45 seconds. Because that way you'll see your sum totals and see everything that you need to see before you actually pull the trigger on generating the batch. So once you've done that and you decide all the numbers look good, you'll hit generate. And the system will give you a little warning screen and remind you might try the trial run button instead, just in case. And then I'll hit continue and we'll get a little clunking, grinding gear wheel. And then the screen will come back and now you'll see the numbers have been updated. So still 8 eligible to receive invoices, but now all 8 of them have been invoiced and there's 0 remaining. And down in the batch list here, I'll see here's that batch I just generated. Okay, we have a batch ID, which makes it easier for you to talk to me about these batches if we need to do something with them. The delivery type is paper, 8 were generated, and I can download those 8 by clicking on the download button here. Okay, so that's, ignore these blank pages. I've got a bug, and not a bug, I've got some weirdness in the template that I used for Lake County, which is what this county is set to. But there you go. This PDF is now ready to print stuff into envelopes. So what happens if I open this up and I look at it and I go, oh no, this is not right. These fees are incorrect, or I've got a misspelling in my invoice and I need to back out of here. And I highly recommend you do that analysis immediately, because as soon as we receive a payment, or as soon as somebody adjusts or revises one of these invoices that's in this batch, we can't delete it anymore. Okay, so until then, I can hit this delete button. It's going to ask me, why are you deleting this batch? And then I can click yes, and it's going to delete the PDF files. And in this case, it's not entering reversing transactions. We don't want to gum up the whole transactions database with this. It's actually just deleting the transactions entirely. And don't worry, there's no way that I can conceive of to use this delete function to do anything nefarious. But just in case, we actually keep an audit log of who deleted batches and when they deleted them and what reason they provided for deleting them. And you have to have certain revenue management permissions in order to be able to delete the batch. So we do have some control over it. Having deleted the batch, you'll see our numbers go back to 8 eligible to generate, and I can generate those. So that's, in a nutshell, the batch invoice generator. If I were to do the same thing, but instead of generating invoices, I generate invoices with certificates. Process is exactly the same, but our PDF file will contain both the invoice and the certificate for each location, just one page after the other. Now, if I go into the transaction ledger for any of these other businesses, I think I had some Arcos in here. I know I had some other Safeways. So this new invoice we just generated, right? This is the 2025 calendar year invoice, first device registration invoice. They show up in the transaction ledgers just like I had created them manually one at a time, right? So as far as the system's concerned, there's now no difference between these batch generated invoices and any other invoice. So in order to pay them, I'll go to the transaction ledger and enter a payment receipt. If I need to adjust them, I'll go in and I'll use the revision button here. The one thing that we will see a little differently is the download batch PDF is now enabled. If the invoice wasn't generated in a batch, obviously you can't download the batch PDF, but if I wanted to see the batch file that this was generated from, I can open that from here. But I can also, actually just download the single invoice PDF as well. So all the relevant information is available as if I had created that manually. Now let's look at one other option. And this is something that, until you've done some evaluation of your data, you probably don't want to turn this on. But eventually it would be nice to get to a point where you can email invoices. So one thing I didn't talk about here is this option under device registration invoicing. And that is the ability to batch email device registration invoices. And I'm going to turn that option on. And then I'm going to go back to our batch invoices screen. I'm going to delete that batch that I just created. Oh, I did revise the invoice, didn't I? Oh well. So now you'll see a new option here, and that's delivery via paper or email. And if I select email, the screen is going to recalculate, and it's going to tell me 0 locations are eligible because I don't have any email addresses in this test system. But with your production data, if you choose the email option, then this count will only include locations that have either a location email or a business email. And when you generate a batch of emails, we have a background emailer that runs, and you'll see right now the status is running. That's up here in the top right. So if we get to a point where you're ready to start using the email function, basically what we want to do is toggle the emailer off. That means it's paused. You can generate the batch and you can look at it and evaluate it. No emails will be sent out from the system. Once you're happy that everything looks exactly right and you're ready for those emails to go out the door, you simply toggle the emailer back on, and then away those emails go. Just to give you an idea of what those look like. Actually, I'm going to skip this because we're going to run short on time here. Riverside County is the only county so far that's used the email system. They've sent out close to 4,000 invoices by email, and they're super happy with it. So, after we get all the data into CalCATS, we can do an evaluation of how many of your locations have good email addresses, and then maybe turn on that option for you. So now we've got a bunch of invoices out there and we want to enter payments for them. And when you're in device registration season and you start getting those payments fast and furious, you're not going to want to enter them one by one by opening up a transaction ledger. So instead, we'll use the batch payment entry. Now, when I'm entering batch payments, again, this is going to seem a little convoluted, but it's all come out of that CDFA audit that we went through. So every batch of payments has to be entered in a payment batch, and each user can only begin one payment batch at a time. So once you start a payment batch, you have to close that payment batch before you can start another one. So I'll start a new batch here, and this is our batch payment entry screen. It's very keyboard focused. Okay, so the idea is you've got a stack of checks and you want to enter this data as quickly as possible. So it begins with the cursor blinking in the invoice search box. And you'll start typing any of the searchable fields on an invoice, which are the location name, the owner name, the account number, the permit number, and I think the address. So hopefully pretty quickly, without having to search and hunt and peck around too much, you'll see the invoice number that you're looking for. Arrow key down to it, hit the enter key. So the screen now displays in big bold numbers what the total invoice is, $2,071.20. And all you need to do is verify that the payment you're looking at is for that amount. If that's true, then you hit the F key, just like we do on the regular payment screen, and the screen will fill out all the amounts for you. Then you'll enter the date received, hit tab, enter the payment type, cash, check, credit card. I'm just using the down arrow to scroll through them. Tab, hit the check number, hit tab, and then to execute a button in a web browser that's highlighted like the add payment button is now, you hit the space bar. So that then at the bottom, you'll see it's entered that payment into our payment batch, and it's put us back up in the invoice search box where I can start searching for the next invoice. So next payment, hit the tab key, press F to register the payment, put the payment date in, payment type, tab, space bar. So once you're used to it, it's very quick. Just use the keyboard, jam in all those payments. The idea here is, as we're compiling this batch, we are mentally going to put all these payment, whatever forms of payment they are, cash, credit card slips, checks, into a deposit bag. And we're going to print a report to go in that deposit bag, which will be the payment batch report. And we're going to cart that off down to Treasury. We're going to hand it over to them. They're going to count everything and give us a receipt for the batch. So now we have two pieces of paper. We have the CalCATS batch payment report. We got the Treasury receipt, and then they're going to go make the bank deposit that day or the next day. And when you get that deposit, I don't know if they'll give it to you, but you'll have a third piece of paper, which is the bank statement. So you have three independent sources to verify that payment batch total. Okay, if I enter a payment incorrectly or by mistake, I can delete it out of the batch. None of these payments has been entered into the transaction system yet. Right? These are all in a holding area until I close the batch. So if I need to go away to lunch or whatever, and I just log out of the system, when I come back and log in again and I go to batch payments, it's going to tell me I already have an open batch. I got to finish that one before I can start anything new. So I can't leave any payment batches hanging out there without either closing them or canceling them. So I'll click continue open batch, and when I'm finished with everything that's going to go into this physical deposit, I'll close that batch out. And that's going to apply all the payments to the accounts in their transaction ledgers and close out that payment batch. Okay, and once it's closed out, I've got a pencil icon which lets me look at it, shows me all the payments that were in there, and I've got a little calculator icon that generates my batch report. So that's a report that lists all of the payments in the batch with a summary of total number of payments and the batch payment total. Well, I've got a typo there, payment. Okay, so that's the batch payment entry part of the weights and measures revenue system.